only to the extent that I'm aware that while the road was originally proposed, it has been withdrawn, my understanding is, from going through that area.
Yes.
Partly as a result of the archaeological findings that came through by the bypass work. But other than that, I've got no additional information, so I could follow up.
That would be helpful.
Hey, can I just say there, Commissioner, I think the relevance of it, although it hasn't been designated, the uncertainty has, what I've said in my submissions, has created a planning blight.
Yes.
And that's part of the reason why significant work would need to be done on the property now. So, and a lot of that work would require a resource consent. And so the Rose Run and potential purchasers are unsure whether such consent would be granted, given the high significance that of the property that council archaeologists have put forward.
Do you actually use the term planning blight, Sarah? I wrote it down myself with a question mark, but you might have used it yourself.
Yes, I did use it, yes.
Can you just point me to where that is? It's a strange term, I know, but it's something which is a thing.
It's in paragraph 11A.
All right, yes. I see that there, thank you. All right, look, I think we'll move to some questions, starting with Commissioner Coffin.
Thank you, Ms. Onley and David. Apologies for you needing to get up. I think it was early in the morning.
Right.
Thank you very much for your submission. I perhaps don't have questions for you because I think you've clearly set out your concerns and the constraints which you've identified quite clearly. And Ms. Onley's also helped in terms of the context for that. What I'm most struggling with is actually I've got the proposed schedule. I've got the Mr. McMurdy's summary assessment, and then I've got the archaeological site records, which are in the back of the appendix of Mr. McCurdy. What I'm really struggling with is to correlate the extent from those documents to what I see on the map. That's the gap that I'm struggling with. So perhaps that's more of a question for Mr. McCurdy. I should also say my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, and I probably need a magnifying glass to read the page that's in the, there's a page of the journal which has been reduced that's in the archaeological record as well. And all I saw was 50,000 artifacts within a 3,000 square meters area, but I just don't know where that is. So yeah, there's bits of information, but I'm not quite sure how they all come together in a coherent manner. So maybe Mr. McCurdy will enlighten us a little bit.
Yes, Dan, are you there and can you help us?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that question, because yes, this is a very complicated site with a very complicated history. In my evidence, I refer to 2 reports and a letter, which I believe, I'll pass this over to Joe, but I believe that they've been provided.
I have just today sent it so that we could put it on the overall website. Dan has referred to that to determine his overall summary appendix information. We're in the same situation that I didn't receive all of that information until before we talked to the Rose just a week or so ago. So I have a whole zip file. One of those reports is over 700 pages long. And there's also a report from Dan, I think it was 2010, and his colleague, Mr. Gibbs, which is also in that zip file, which is the basis for the extent of the district plan.
So is all that information, was that available through the plan making process, submission
No,
process?
it hasn't been. I'm aware that the Rows have seen some of that,
Yeah.
those reports in the past. I think they have seen Mr. McCurdy's report. I'm not sure whether they had previously seen the very, very large report that was done by Professor Holdaway, was it? Which relates to the whole bypass work at the time.
Okay, so that was prepared, yes. And would Puketapu Hapu have access to that?
Yes, they have had access to that. I have sent it to them. All
Yes,
that information.
just recently, or
Just recently. I don't know whether they've seen it before because I've not been part of those discussions.
yes. Right. Well, Dan, can you just point us to your page numbers in your appendix 1, where we should
It's page 48 and 49.
48 and 49. Thank you.
That's correct. Yeah, so the relevant image there is on page 49. So that is the image that is referenced in those other documents. And that is ultimately the source of the extent.
Just in terms of that, Daniel, is that map showing ML plan? Is that showing landform or extent of the settlement? It's a bit small on my page that I'm looking at. So I can't.
We'll bring it up just so everyone's literally on the same page. Julie's doing that for us now.
Page 49, Julie.
But yes, Commissioner Coffin, that is a very good distinction to make. So that is the original landform of the hill that Te Orapuriri was located on. So to be very clear, that is an interpretation of the extent of Te Orapuriri based on based on that landform, and also based on where we have previously identified other archaeological features that would be part of Te Orapuriri.
Okay, that was my second question then. Yeah, okay. And the nature of those features, those that are included in the archaeological site records?
Yes, yeah, so they're all in the area in archaeological assessment, which is the McCurdy and Gibb 2010. It's the document that kind of summarizes everything there. But basically it looks like this rifle trenches down by the railroad, which is the southern end. Mm-hmm. But Mr. Rowe raises a very good point that throughout this process we have always suggested that further investigation, archaeological investigation, would be required to actually definitively determine the extent of Te Orapuriri. And realistically, that could only be destructive investigation, which is probably why there hasn't been an appetite for it.
Okay, so just to summarize where we've got to, the extent generally follows the landform that's identified in this ML plan, correlated with the archaeological evidence that you've seen. You have visited the site?
Yes, I've had many visits to the site over the years.
And the archaeological records that have been gathered today. Just
That's
in
right,
terms of that reference to a journal entry, I just can't remember exactly what the reference was, but they said there was the 50,000 artifacts in a 3,000 square meters. That was part of the Transit New Zealand investigation. Whereabouts was that?
So that is actually, if I can share my screen, this might clear up all of these questions actually. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
Awesome. Oops, sorry, I'll just get everything in the right place. Okay, that should be showing the extent. Is it? Can everybody see that?
Okay.
Yes, so that white extent is the extent proposed. So this is the area in report, so McCurdy and Gibb 2010. The brown areas up here, that's the extent of the excavations that took place under the transit work for the State Highway
Okay.
3 realignment. And so that brown area is where the 50,000 odd artifacts were encountered.
You'll have to excuse me, I'm not really familiar with this area, but those areas adjacent to the landform, were they former wetland or were they dry areas?
I believe so. Down here by the 11, that is
Yes.
still a wetland. Would that?
Okay.
That's correct, isn't it, Mr. Rowe? Oh, sorry. I'm not allowed to ask
When we had the
that.
property, it wasn't, no, but since the bypass was built, a lot of water has been going down through there, and probably between over near the Broughton Urupa there, and between there and our property, during winter it does become quite swampy, but originally no, it was not.
Yeah, so that wetland that's shown there is on the ML plan.
And this is a bit of a big question, it's a bit of a leap, but in your experience, based on those excavations which were done in the north there, in the northeast, and looks like to the west, do you think they're representative of the types of archaeology or ethnological evidence that you would find across the site?
I believe the bulk of Te Arapuriri would be focused on this central point here. So that's the high point, the tihi of the site. Yep. So we, on that northern excavation there, we only counted the edges of it basically. So there were large gunfighter trenches. So this was a gunfighter pa, one of the only gunfighter pa ever excavated in New Zealand. And it covered pretty much that entire brown area there. To be, you've mentioned that other brown area to the northeast.
Yes.
That is actually Hoiwaka village. That's a separate settlement from Te Arapuriri.
Yep. Is it contemporaneous with the site, or?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember that. Sorry, I was part of those excavations, but not the lead excavator.
Okay, thank you.
But sorry, to actually correctly answer your question that you asked earlier, because I didn't, I believe the evidence to the south would probably actually be of a different nature to what was encountered to the north. I suspect it will be associated features rather than the core features of Te Arapuriri.
Excuse me, Daniel, I think you mentioned you have walked over the property numerous times. During that time, did you take into account the amount of excavation work that has previously been done on the property, and to the depths and the amount that it's probably like 75%, and it's quite extensive. What would be the chances of you finding artifacts with the amount of work already been done? Like, you can see the map there, but does not show any. It doesn't give the other people in the meeting any idea of how it has been excavated.
Yes, that is a good point of clarification. So yes, there has been a lot of work undertaken on the property. Definitely, there has been a lot of previous earthworks. That doesn't change the extent of the original site though, and it would require a full assessment of what might be remaining. This of course comes back to a question that's been discussed a little bit and submitted on by other submitters on whether it's appropriate to record destroyed, quote, destroyed.
Well, to be honest, like in some of those areas, it's been probably excavated down to 3 meters. I don't believe in the history in the past. Would there be any artifacts? They would have been pushed aside. I would have believed. I would have thought.
Sarah?
Sorry, I just wanted to say to David that you're not supposed to ask the other witness questions.
Oh, sorry, this is all new to me, so it's.
Yeah.
We've had a, I'm just sort of letting it go a bit, Sarah.
Okay.
Just sort of the circumstance where we're on Zoom, we're sort of finding out information as we go. Sarah's right strictly, but
I just thought it was a relevant question to post, to put to him,
Yeah, normally you can ask those things if you sort of work them back through me, but we're trying to get to the best information, so we'll be a bit flexible, I think.
Apologies.
Perhaps through you, Mr. Chair, I think Mr. McCurdy in the end of it, he's answered my questions without any further prompting. So I appreciate it. This is a good way of just correlating all of the inputs that we've had based on that map to how the extent has been determined. So that's helpful. Thank you.
And to make it clear, sorry, I'm happy with the back and forth discussion as well, even if it's not appropriate.
I'll leave that to the chair.
Yeah, so we haven't descended into a rabble, so I'm reasonably comfortable. Yes, so Antoine, is that you finished?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Yes. David, do you have any?
Yeah, well, I guess like I think it was Antoine.
I was asking, sorry, David, the other commissioner, Mr. McMahon. Commissioner McMahon.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay. Too many Davids in the room, Mr.
Yes.
Rowe. Yes, I do have some questions, but they're mainly for Ms. Ongley. Can you hear me okay, Ms. Ongley?
Yes, I can, Commissioner.
Good, thank you. I'm interested in the case that you presented. The relief being sought is for the overlay to be modified or reduced or removed. Firstly, is there any indication of the extent of the reduction or modification given in the submission notice?
The only suggestion is that the length of the property down to the railway line is considered too extensive, and there's no tangible evidence for that. So Mr. Rowe prepared his submission without any legal or planning assistance.
I understand that.
Yeah.
It's not a criticism. It's just I'm trying to ascertain the scope that the panel has to address Mr. Rowe's concern.
Yes, well, I would say that your scope is to delete it altogether.
Okay.
Because he's saying it's excessive.
Yes.
So I think it would be between deleting it altogether or reducing it down, particularly where it goes down to the south.
Yes. And how would we determine the extent of that reduction? What evidential basis would there be for that?
So I've been instructed on this relatively recently, and the rows have not. They do not have their own archaeologists giving evidence, of course. What my submissions are putting forward really is that it's a mix of the overlay plus the rules that apply.
Yeah, no, look, I understand your submission. I just
Yeah.
the question was a simple one. How can we discern the extent of relief being sought by your client?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've hopefully answered that part of it. In terms of the evidence, I acknowledge that my client doesn't have archaeological evidence.
Yes. Yes.
He's noted quite a few statements in the reports about how further studies were going to need to be done in order to verify the extent.
Yes, I understand that. In terms of, I mean, and that brings us on squarely on to my second question. You've already acknowledged that, and that is that there is no archaeological evidence being led. The evidence that in front of us from Mr. McCurdy talks about the proposed extent being well supported by archaeological evidence, and that the archaeological and through the archaeological interpretation of the landscape, putting aside the economic argument, which I want to come to in a minute, what are you saying we should be putting aside that evidence that's largely uncontested?
No, I'm saying that you should note that Mr. Rowe was provided with a number of statements that council were going to verify that. But I'm not saying that you should put it aside.
Okay, thank you. That brings me on to the second area of question, and that's the Section 85 matter. And I understand appreciate the distinction you've made between what's a Environment Court matter and making a ruling on unreasonableness under Section 85, and where you think it lands with us being a challenge to the provisions that are in the plan. I understand the legal argument there. I just wondered, is there any nexus between that challenge under Section 85 and the test of Section 32 that we must consider in terms of the appropriateness of provisions? Because at the end of the day, we have to couch our decision in terms of Section 32, not in terms of Section 85. I wondered if you could assist the panel in that respect.
Yes, the cases do talk about the relevance of Section 32 to Section 85, but it's a little bit difficult because a lot of these Environment Court cases are determining the question whether the buyback should be triggered.
Yes.
So I don't know if I could assist much further, except to say that in the Stevens case, Judge Jackson also talked about Section 7E, efficiency. Obviously the cost to landowners is part and parcel of what you have to consider.
Yes, I understand that, and I have a question on that. I guess one of the key words in Section 32 is the word appropriateness, appropriateness of methods to give effect to policies, which didn't give effect to objectives, and then higher order documents. Is there any nexus between the appropriateness test and the reasonableness test under Section 85?
Yes, I think there is, Commissioner. The case law does point out that Section 85 is a little bit of an anomaly in the Resource Management Act, and there's a lot of the courts have struggled to see how it fits in because it uses words that aren't used in the other sections of the Act. It uses words such as whether it's an unfair and unreasonable burden on a person, or make land incapable of reasonable use. But I would say that those are issues that come into appropriateness anyway. They come into Section 5 in terms of, I've talked about economic well-being. But I can't ignore all the case law about recognising and providing for Section 6E matters.
Yes.
So they come into the mix, of course, but then there is Section 6E.
Yes. Okay. Just finally, the unreasonableness, in your view, relates to, I'm just looking at my notes, the cost of a discretionary activity resource consent and the uncertainty of the outcome. On the first of those matters, is there any particular points you want to bring to our attention in terms of the cost of the process?
Not particularly. We haven't given evidence on cost, but the evidence of Mr. Rowe is about how he's tried to sell the property, and it's put the buyers off.
Yes, and does that possibly goes more to a uncertainty of outcome?
Yeah, probably goes to both. I think it goes to both, but possibly more to the uncertainty. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for those answers. Mr. Rowe, I don't have any particular questions of you. I think the answers that you've given to the other commissioners has been useful, and I've noted those, but I was particularly interested in those matters I've raised with your counsel. So thank you, Ms. Longley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rowe, I just have a question of clarification. You mentioned that you put the property in the market. I think you said 2001, but do you mean 2021?
Oh, sorry, yes, that would be correct. Yeah, last year. So I think it was March 2021. So okay. Coming close to a year ago. That's right.
Yes, and your hopefully the buyer that you had on the hook for a while, when did they finally come off the hook?
Well, the contract was extended probably maybe I think 3 times. they were very, very keen. I think they had the property blessed, had a karakia. They were very, very keen. But they did have a lot of frustration with the council. I think the iwi liaison officers there, a lot of phone calls were made. There was no reply. Emails made, no emails back. So it was all one-way traffic. And I believe they were in one of the conversations when they were able to make contact, they were told, you know, as they take care of children, the children would have a negative effect on the property, on the ambience of the property. So it sounded, yeah, it's quite disappointing to hear, really. You know, they sound like, you know, great people who would have had property and would have looked after it very well. They were very mindful of the Maori needs, and I believe the husband was Maori. So it was, yeah, it's quite disappointing. It was just they ran into roadblocks every step of the way.
But ultimately, it was their own counsel, their own solicitor that advised them. Yes,
I believe they'd still love to have the property, but currently, yeah, they'll be. We've been told, you know, they're unable to plant trees, build gardens. They need to extend the house slightly for the children they take care of. You know, the property, you know, even if I still had it, I'd love to plant trees on it. You know, because it does cost a lot of money. It's like 10 acres, just under 10 acres. It does cost money for the upkeep of the property, and if it's run as an orchard, you know, it is a means to pay for that. And you know, for many years it was used as an orchard, and then slowly the trees did die off, the fruit trees. And I did inquire to the council about putting more fruit trees back in, but they said, you know, there'll be no compensation once the road was put through area where you planted. And I notice the most protected part of the land is up near the bypass road. So that may also now be, if you did scale back, you know, the setback from, say, the Urupā or somewhere, it may also affect the amount of trees we can plant. So that's why, as far as the overlay goes, I'd probably push for a full reduction of the overlay, and, you know, allowing the rules that applied to how the property was previously.
Right. So we're going to hear back from Joe about the roading situation. Is that now 100% off the table?
I can't confirm totally, but that's my understanding at the moment.
You can confirm that back to us after some inquiries. Your position is quite clear, Mr. Rowe. You prefer to have the overlay off because you're feeling that that's restricting your opportunities for your use and.
Well, for myself, or yes, for myself, for any future possible purchases. Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And we'll hear from Tapu Hapu as well, who have submissions. So I think we've probably explored things as far as we can. So just for yourself and your father and your family in Japan, you know, just well wishes from us. I know it's difficult to come onto a Zoom like this from across the world. But thank you for your submission and for giving us such, you know, open, clear answers. And Sarah, thank you for your legal submissions. As with every submission, there's just different aspects we need to consider, and we spend a bit of time on these sort of matters just so we fully understand the position and the facts and the context. The context is very important. So thank you very much. I think we probably need to have a discussion, Julie, about the balance of today, now that everyone is online. We have gone over, and we did sit until after 6 o'clock yesterday. And the Zoom format is particularly challenging. I know I heard from the commissioners last evening that very long day was very difficult. So just thinking about, we're still in the morning's program, and I think we just finished it, haven't we?
Yes.
Yes. and it's 4:45. I don't think we're going to get through the balance of these submitters today. I don't want to, well, I'll basically make a call that we can't sit again really late, because we've put a potential late day again tomorrow.
I understand Ms Brand is only available today for Puketapu Hapu.
Yes.
As for the other submitters, I'm not sure of their availability.
Yes. And I'm aware that Mr Kiss and the Houghtons have been waiting.
Yes, they've been bounced from yesterday.
And they're flowing down, and
Mr Kiss and Mr Vader are online. They may be able to answer their availability.
yeah, the gears are here now too, are they?
I'm not sure if there are.
So I think we will need to take a quick comfort stop, and then move to the Houghtons and just confirm whether the gears have missed their slot. So if they're there, perhaps you could, Mr. and Mrs. Gear, are you? Peter and Kathy, are you online? No.
I have had an email from Mr Gear at 3 o'clock, but he hasn't responded.
He did.
He did come on asking a different question, so I have asked him to confirm.
Okay, but he was a morning person. I don't think we've seen him. He may have come and gone. All right, so look, let's take a 10-minute break. We will hear from the Houghtons. Keith, are you? I'm thinking we probably get to schedule some more time. Probably would almost possibly get through you and Puketapu Hapu. I don't think we've got time to do any much more. So
I think Fern is more important than me because she can only make today.
yes,
And I'm happy to be bumped off to any other time.
yes, I do think I'd like to talk to Julie about some. We've got some time. Originally, this hearing was scheduled for 2 days, and Julie and I realised that wasn't going to cut the. We're not going to achieve what we needed to do. So we've scheduled another day, but Commissioner Coffin is chairing another important meeting, I think, and we can't start till 2 o'clock. We do have programmed quite a lot of the iwi submitters tomorrow afternoon, and we also got the important right of reply. And I just feel we're not going to do this topic justice in literally the hour and a bit we've got this afternoon, and 3 hours tomorrow, so it's not going to work. So I think we'll hear from the Broughtons, from Ms Brand on Puketapu Hapu, and then see where we're sitting after a quick break. But the indications I have is that we probably need to schedule another day, and we'll have to work with everyone on that. So apologies for that. I think you've probably all observed how important each of these submissions is to the submitters, and we just can't rush through these matters. I would not be comfortable with that. Right, so we'll take a 10-minute break, come back at 5 to 4, and start with you, Mr. Kiss, and your team. Thank you.
Internet connection dropped out. No, it's going to change, come flying down here. I find that nothing's changed, so that's fine. Gene, I'm quite happy for any other time.
Okay.
I'll fit in, so whatever you come up with. Is
Okay, it's awesome, thank you, appreciate that.
Mm.
Yes, hello everyone. We're still waiting for our 42A officer to return. So Joe Ritchie, we won't start until she comes in. So I just wanted to let you all know that we're poised to go as soon as Joe comes back. All right, so finally we get to talk to you, Stephen and Carla and Stefan, in terms of advising them. So welcome and thank you for your patience. I know we were trying to get you on yesterday, but things didn't work out. And now it's your turn to present your case to us.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having us along. Steve had some trouble yesterday getting back from the South Island, so thank you for accommodating us into today. Just wanted to acknowledge and say hello to Ngāti Mutunga and Marlene, who's here today. We've been working with Ngāti Mutunga on this land that we're talking about now for a while, and we really value the relationship that we have with Ngāti Mutunga. There's just a couple of things I wanted to start with, and I'll hand over to Steve, who is the landowner. And we also have Dr. Hans Dieter, who's our archaeologist and has done historical work here on the site and has some interesting information to provide. I'm referring to, of course, the site at Kaipikiri.
Yes.
And if Judy has the proposed district plan map available, that would be quite useful to have that up on screen. If not, figure 3 of my submission report would be useful at this point.
If we've talked about the site before, haven't we?
Yes, we talked about it at the SNA hearing, and the context of that was the overlays of the SNA combined with the SASM sites have a significant spatial extent over this land.
Yes, yes, no, we were all on that hearing, so I recall that and intimately that discussion. So,
Sorry, the right property there? Or
don't think so.
what number, Kaipikiri?
You have a road, a street.
179. That's right.
While we're getting to that, just by way of introduction to what we're presenting today, and it's common amongst a lot of the other submitters that I've been hearing, is that we have a site here that has a very wide extent in the sense that a significant area of the land holding is covered by a SASM site. And so that's one of the reasons that we're here today. The other part to this is that there is quite a wide disparity between what the archaeologists are presenting as physical evidence for the site and a much wider cultural extent as presented by Ngāti Mutunga. And the nature of the exercise is for a line to be drawn around the extent of the site, and the question is, where is the best place for that line? Also, in part of my submissions, we talk about the appropriate objective policies and rules for sites as well. But really the main thing that if we're focusing on today is where is the right place for that mapped extent. I just refer to point 8.6 of my submission, is that in support of the submitter, my observation is that there is general consensus that Kaipikiri is of historic significance to Mana Whenua. The question is where the boundaries of the site should be and what is the right balance of mapping objectives, policies and rules that afford the desired outcome. And the desired outcome, which is expressed in the 42A report and through the proposed district plan, is the avoidance of damage or loss of the sites and protection from inappropriate land use, subdivision and development. And then referring back to point 6.14, a couple of pages earlier in my submission, the Houghtons have requested in their submission fairly succinctly that without evidence to the contrary, they'd like the relief to be for the site to be removed. And in the 42A report, the reporting plan has rejected that. So I've requested that consideration be given to a review of the boundary extent of site 433, which is a much larger site, and a review of the objectives, policies and rules within the SASM and historic heritage sections for consideration of situations to assist landowners who are significantly affected by sites. And by that, I think what we're seeing through the hearings is quite a lot of evidence that it is those landowners where a significant proportion of all of their site is affected, as opposed to landowners who have perhaps a small corner at the back of a farm. We're talking here about consideration within the rules, objectives and policies to support landowners to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being, but also at the same time while maintaining the integrity of the SASM and historic heritage. So that's sort of our starting point. I'll hand over to Steve.
Yes, Mr. Kiss, can I just ask a question of the team you've assembled, or Steve's got on board. So you're essentially giving us, you've obviously worked on the property a lot. We've about that last hearing around the site's significance. You're presenting evidence as an expert surveyor with planning experience as well. Is that how you would couch your...
I would describe myself as mostly facilitating and supporting Steve. Our main expert evidence today is through Dr. Hans Bader.
Yes.
But I have got enough experience of the district plan through consenting for subdivisions to be able to support Steve and potentially be involved in discussions around objectives, policies and rules.
Yes, yes. So your expertise in the planning area is through a long history of working with subdivision rules and development rules in the plan. So that's fine. Mr. Bader doesn't have a statement of evidence as I understand it, but there is a report, there's material attached that Dr. Bader is the author of, and he's available, or will he present evidence as such, or just be available for questions? I just wanted to understand how you're going to roll.
Okay, yeah, he's mainly available here to answer questions, but his reports stand there in the appendices as he's written them, but he's also here to briefly introduce the work that he did for those investigations on site. Yes. At this site.
Excellent, thank you. We'll proceed. We'll hear from Steve now, I think.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and everybody who's listening today. Thank you for giving me this chance to have my say. Probably just touch a little bit on Keith's involvement. Stefan's involvement is, for me, is a relationship with the company and Keith, who's in the room there prior to this, going back about 5-6 years now. And that's where Stefan's background in this has come from, through that association and change of ownership.
Yes.
I'd just like you to understand that you know, I am tangata whenua as well. I'm a descendant of local iwi, same as Keith, actually. And I completely appreciate and understand this piece of land, the history and the cultural matters that go with it. And there's never been nothing I've wanted to do other than to make sure that what we did with Kaipikiri was to stop potential development and for us to occupy it as a family in the way that our generations have in the past. And, you know, we'll never do anything to harm ourselves, to negatively impact on our family up there through the cultural matters that are around this bit of land. I've always spoke with Ngāti Mutanga that, and I think they get this from me, is that I'm a generation of person that wants to foster the whole equality and respect of the land and how we developed it and build homes, our home on it to live, and continue to farm it the best you can in this economical environment. Not that it's really that economical, because the rates up there are that high, you can't actually make a lot of money off it. But and the rules that were there around the property when we purchased it 5 years ago, and then with the Urupā that's there and the SASM that was set up around it, is what we started to work with. And that has been a process that has taken a very, very long time, even with council, to try and get to a point where we can build a home up there. And now that there is this proposal in place to extend this SASM right over the whole property, I just look at it and I think, even the existing process that was there was literally not working. And here we are now putting it over the whole place, and I can't see how it would work anyway. And I guess it's detailed down the track, but it's not been an easy journey to where we are now. I think a little bit like David Rowe before mentioned about the financially, I'm not too sure if he meant the mental impact on everybody around us, how long it's taking, is probably not really realised by everybody. If we'd got to the bottom of this, if we were able to build our home, I think within a reasonable period under the rules that were there some time back, we all know that in the last couple of years, everything's doubled in price. So, you know, now I'm sitting here looking at, I paid a premium for a lovely piece of land, and financially, it's tough with what may end up on the table and its actual value. And if somebody says to me there'll be relief in the rates, I'll probably, in the politest way, tell them where to jam that relief, because that's really not what this is about. I've had that said to me before, but yeah. I think that is probably it from me. I just would like to see these extents of these SASMs challenged in a way that there's some science around it. I respect and I get the fact there are significant errors on this bit of land. Let's identify these and look at the definition, I guess, of what is significant and how far that actually stretches out. Because I think we need to live in a world where we can still work with those and occupy the land as the way it was always intended. And be respectful for that, and that's everything I've ever tried to do and still trying to do with the development of the home up there. And now with the farming side of it too is impacted. Is not too sure where you can put a fence in. Can we stick yards in? And if we're going down tracks where we need consents for all that, it just becomes so hard to operate. I hope that's not where we end up going. But, so I think that's it.
Yeah, Steve, just by the way, we had a good discussion with Hillary and Federated Farmers and Mark Hooper, was it, yesterday, about just those farming aspects. And there's some rules there which I know the staff are thinking about in terms of just the operational issues around maintaining fence lines and tracks and those sort of things. So that you can be assured that the Federated Farmers have really raised those issues on all the farmers' behalf. And there's some possible movement there. We'll have to hear back from Joe and write a reply, but and certainly thank you for talking to us again. I can remember our discussion in the hearing 5 around the other areas of significance, the Indigenous vegetation, and you've got a similar ethic with those that you relate to us. But when you look at your property and the overlays, yeah, you're a special case, but there's a few of these special cases around about that we just have to look at in detail and see what might be able to be worked through. So I think, do the other commissioners have any questions in the meantime of Mr. Broughton? Nope.
Yes, I do, Stephen. Sorry.
Good.
Good afternoon, Mr. Broughton.
Houghton. Yeah, Houghton is it? Sorry.
Houghton, sorry, Houghton. Yes. Hi again. I recall you from hearing 5. Yes. Just a few facts about the property, which you will know, and I don't necessarily. So I note it's a 26 hectare property.
Correct.
Zoned rural production in the.
Correct.
Yes. And just remind me when you purchased it.
I want to say 2017, 2016.
Right. Okay. So the operative plan was the prevailing document then.
Yes.
And we heard from Mr. Kiss last time that there was an SNA, but at the time that you purchased it, there was a Waihi Tapu site shown in the operative plan, but it had no extent associated with it. Is that the case?
Only the 50-metre
Yes.
extent around it. Yes, if that's what you refer to. Yep.
Okay. Okay. And just in terms of the outcomes that you want to seek on the property in terms of development, there was some mention in Mr. Kiss's evidence about some family homes to be constructed.
Yeah, I might have mentioned this last time. I guess as a family and multi generations, we've always lived somewhat together.
Yes.
Probably the 4th generation, and my kids will be the 5th generations, where mums and dads and the kids have lived on the same land in a separate dwelling.
All right.
We do that now. Currently, only just down the road by a couple of kilometres on the same road.
Yes.
And and we just jumped at the chance when this came available to be able to do the same up there. Yeah.
Yes. But in the meantime, it's being undertaken for productive farming purposes.
It's currently, we have just run beef we were running beef on one side and leasing out to the dairy farmer the other side. So this unusual title actually has a tar seal road running right through the middle of it.
Yes,
yeah.
I noticed that.
Unusual in itself. Yeah.
Any cultivation undertaken previously or proposed on the site?
Not in my time. I believe some time back that it had happened. Yep.
Yes. Okay, that's useful. Mr. Kiss, just a couple of questions for you and your knowledge from a planning and surveying perspective. What's the minimum allotment size in the rural production zone for a dwelling? Or
Off the top of my head, I believe it's 4,000 square metres
okay,
with a 20 hectare balance.
yes,
There is a proposal for a balanced lot rule related to the SNA provisions.
yes, that's right. I'm familiar with those now. It's all coming back to me. So with a 26 hectare, but putting the SNA to one side, I know that's difficult to do, but with a 26 hectare property, you would be able to at least get one dwelling with the 20 hectare balance allotment. Is that the case?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors here. One is whether you'd subdivide the east side from the west. They're currently both in the same title.
Okay.
There's probably a planning argument for that.
Yes.
And then secondly, a second dwelling on the other side of the road will need a resource consent because it's more than 25 metres from
Okay.
the dwelling. The main dwelling that the Houghtons are proposing and are working through a consent right now is on the west side.
Yes.
And that's moving
yes.
fairly forward as far as I understand. As I said at the SNA hearing, that seems to be going quite well. But it's more what could happen on that eastern side
Yes.
of the road.
Yes, so a second dwelling would definitely require resource consent under either,
Yep.
yes, either whether you subdivided first and then approached it that way, or whether you went for two dwellings initially.
If you subdivided first, then the dwelling itself would only need a resource consent because of the SASM.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, but the second dwelling, that would be the dwelling on what?
If you did not subdivide but went for a dwelling on the eastern side, that would trigger the second dwelling rule as well as the SASM.
Okay. Thank you. So the reason I was asking those questions, Mr. Houghton, is I just wanted to ascertain what other resource consents, in addition to the SASM, that you might need. And obviously, I conveniently ignored the SNA too, which has its own set of rules. So based on what Mr. Kiss has said, it's highly unlikely you would avoid a need for a resource consent regardless of the SASM, but the SASM would increase the number of rules that you would breach under a series of resource consents. And I just wondered, was that something that you'd appreciated and taken into account, that you're still going to have to go through a resource consent regardless of the SASM to get two dwellings on the site?
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yep.
Yes.
We'd been through that process before at our property down the road about 3k. Yep.
Yes, and
so we.
Yes. So what is it about the additional layer of consenting associated with the SASM that gives you particular concern?
Location.
The ability to locate the dwelling.
In an area that you can enjoy what you have, I guess, around you. Is that what you're? Yeah.
My observation of the process so far is that the SASM consenting is significantly more complex than a second dwelling resource consent application. Have we lost audio?
So no, I think.
I'm sorry, I'm listening.
Are you still questioning, David? Or?
I was wondered if there was more to come on that.
Well, I think a second dwelling on a site is fairly quite close to routine resource consenting. There can be landscape impact assessment reports and neighbours' approvals, but by and large, a well thought out second dwelling application has a good chance of navigating the consent process fairly routinely.
Yes.
Whereas a SASM type consent, in my experience, is generally complex and quite time consuming.
Yes.
and it's case by case, but
Yes.
I would describe it as being significantly more complex than a second dwelling consent application.
It wasn't too difficult the first time I did it, around 18 years ago on our other property. I don't know how much has changed since then. I get the fact that there's a road that runs between it, and possibly we could have a reasonable case to create two titles, then go down at that path, but it's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to retain the lot in one. And because of the time that's where the process we've been going through to get to this point, as a milestone in that idea, that concept, that we haven't got to that point in time. We can see that's that's all off the table at the moment.
Yes. So I guess cutting to the nub, what sort of relief are you proposing in light of the original submission and the having read the report from the Section 42 officer? Where are you now?
Well, we've got this, potentially the main relief is to look at the extent of the site.
Yes.
There is, I could just refer here to Daniel McCurdy's evidence, and in section 10 of my report, Mr. McCurdy states at 10.3 that the location extent of site 433 has been confirmed by field visit. However, the extent proposed by Ngāti Mutunga is larger than that of the PAR. And I would submit that it appears to me to be much or significantly larger than the archaeological extent.
Yes.
And further in 10.4, Mr. McCurdy states that site 433 should remain in the district plan, and the extent proposed should be considered against the evidence provided by Ngāti Mutunga and the 2017 work of Dr. Hans Dieter Bader. So I would tend to agree with that. There's probably a process around that, and it's probably a good intro to Mr. Bader, who's standing by, because I think it's probably that the extent of the site which is of most interest to me, to try and understand what is the potential archaeological extent as seen by those experts, and what is the cultural extent as seen by Ngāti Mutunga.
Yes.
And then the objectives, policies and rules that apply to that, and what is the kind of the optimal way to look after the site and enable fair and reasonable use of the land.
Yes, no, I understand that. I've got page 47 open in front of me, so I've been reading that. What I'm uncertain though, Mr. Kiss, is what the position of yourself and your client is in relation to the archaeological extent that's been confirmed by Mr. McCurdy.
So probably the document I can point to is the work done by Mr. Holswich and Mr. Bader a few years back, which was submitted as part of my evidence, which is drawing H3066, which shows a series of potential building platform areas on the site.
So this is your appendix 2.
Appendix 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's produced by NZ Geomatics Limited.
Yes, it's your appendix 2.
Okay.
I wonder, Stefan, before we go there, you've got your appendix 1 with some mapping, and I just wanted you to take us there and just confirm the key. There's no key on it, so I need you to talk us through those two plans you've shown in your appendix 1.
Sure, okay. So sheet 1 of 2 shows the status under the operative district plan. Yes. And on the top right of the screen is Waihitapu site 433, which I understand that triangle is right on the actual PAR physical, I guess the core PAR site.
Yes.
And then the radius around that is drawn as per the district plan radius.
Yes.
And you'll see that radius doesn't quite touch into Mr. Howden's land at all.
Yes.
Under the operative district plan. And then on the left-hand side, you've got the Waihitapu site 603, which is in the Urupā.
Yes.
The Urupā itself is actually just slightly to the right of that triangle, and then we've done the radius curve around that. So that illustrates the current restrictions on the site and indicates that the ridgeline east of the road on the operative district plan was clear of regulatory requirements for Waitapu sites at the time Mr. Howden purchased the block.
Yes. So that's that green, is that the little green tongue that was below the blue?
Yes, and that sort of area that is not vegetated there is the flattened ridge line.
Yes.
Yes.
And on the NZ Geomatics plan and the work with Mr. Holswich, they identified an area B1 for a proposed building and curvilege area on there based on physical, archaeological investigations as well. And then turning to sheet 2 of the Taylor Patrick drawing, you can see that the extensive site 433 have pushed west as far as the Urupa and south of the Urupa. And the Urupa site as well as coloured brown has extended south slightly. And then we've done the 50 metre rule as the shaded blue area outside of that. So the as I've said in my evidence, the extent of site 433 appears to me to align quite closely to the stream valley floor surrounding the Kaipikiri Hill. So it's a topographical catchment, if you like, of streams bounding the Kaipikiri Hill that generally define the cultural extent of site 433.
And the green mapping on this sheet 2?
That's my assessment of the available land that doesn't have a regulatory overlay of either SNA or SASM.
Yes. And I think we've seen these before in the
yes.
in the hearing 5, haven't we? I just wanted to refresh.
Yeah, that's correct.
Refresh it on. So those are great graphics, and thank you for that. So, David, you're in the chair, I think, in terms of questioning. So, do you want?
I've just got one final question on the on these extents, and it appears that you're not pursuing any further relief on the what number was it, 603? Is that the case, or have I missed that?
That's correct. I think because we're a long way down the track of applying for resource consent at the moment, and these have legal effect, we're already dealing with these extents as if they were live, and we're working with Marlene at Ngāti Matunga on an appropriate house site on that western side, and
yes.
So it's really more the site 433 that is our focus today.
Okay. I have some questions in relation. No, that's the extent of my questions on the scheduling. I have some questions on objectives, policies, and rules late, but I just wonder whether Stephen, we might come back to those, and perhaps to hear from Mr. Baden on the scheduling aspect itself.
Yes, that would be good. So, welcome, Mr. or Dr. Dita Bader. Would you like to just take us through what you'd like to tell us?
Yeah. Greetings, everyone. Tēnā koutou, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm an archaeologist. I did my first excavation in 1984 and did my PhD in 1994, and also since 1994 work in New Zealand, mainly, occasionally in Australia. So that's very short my background. I got called up into this particular project because we were well aware that there are archaeological remains on fair amounts of the landscape. And we were looking together with Keith Holswich if there is anywhere a space that we could situate a dwelling. That was the original idea behind the work that I've done on that property. Now, I want to make foremost a clear-cut separation between cultural sites and archaeological sites, and I do not refer in this evidence to any cultural site because I'm not an expert in it, and it's not for me to make any statement in that regards. In this particular case here, the archaeological sites, whenever we define an extent of an archaeological site, we nearly always start from surface features that are visible, pits, bank and ditches, artificial terraces, those type of things. Now, the surface features are probably like an iceberg indicators. So we see 10% of what's probably there, but it gives us a starting point. And then as archaeologists, we have a number of options, test pits, augers, probing, geophysical surveys, to get to the subsurface features that are not easily visible. In this particular property, we know that the mid-20th century landowner was very fond of his heavy tracked machinery, and it was quite obvious that a lot of bulldozing has been going on. So again, we wanted to see sort of, even if there is somewhere a site, has it been actually completely bulldozed, and is that destruction of something also now an opportunity and availability for something. So we had a number of issues there. And it's quite clear that in this particular case, the beautiful location on the ridge line, that we're probably not just talking about a site as such, but that we're talking about archaeological features within a landscape. And if we take that thought further on, so we have archaeological features within the landscape that might or might not have been partially or completely destroyed by mid-20th century's activities on the site. And that's where the geophysical survey really came in. So we discussed with Stephen where he would prefer to have a nice view, a nice good point. And we also could already see there are surface features that are further to the northwest of the area that we have been looking up. And we left this completely alone because we knew there is activity, there are sites, and that goes beyond the past site. That is quite clear that outside the actual past site, that there are further features, that are further more features there. So we took the geophysics over it, and we could see a number of areas that had archaeological potential, and a number of areas that have been most likely bulldozed, and a number of areas that look like they are still relatively undisturbed, neither from archaeology nor from bulldozing. I used that then to create a model from the geophysical data, and we ground tested that model in a couple of areas. And maybe if we can refer to Mr. Holswich's drawing, if that is available to everyone.
Is that in your report, Hans?
I'm not sure if it's in my report. I think it's an appendix that Stefan supplied.
Okay, that might be
Appendix 3.
Appendix 3 perhaps. Is that right, Stefan?
Yes, it's the one by NZ Geomatics Limited.
Yes, got it. That's a great drawing. That's really helpful.
And on this drawing, you can see that there are a number of geomag areas, area 1, 2, and 3 and 4. So we did quite a number of areas along the area that has been by Steve indicated that he would like to build there if he can. And all these areas, we looked at it, and in some areas, we did some ground testing. And so we took quite a number of areas straight out of the equation and said sort of like, you know, as an example, the geomag area 01, the northern part, not touching that. And then there is obviously at the back some potential pit site coming in. So there is also a boundary that I would consider is reasonably hard. But then at the front, the water tanks, that area where the water tanks has been extensively bulldozed. So there is an area that has been quite destroyed. And the geomag area 03 again looked like that has high archaeological potential, so steering away from that. And within the area 4, originally we thought, oh, that looked, there's quite a number of archaeological sites in there. But when we did the ground testing, it was very quickly obvious that that has been part of the breaking in of the land and subsequent bulldozing again. But obviously that area is not under discussion, the area 04, because Stefan and Stephen are already working on a solution for that. So if we go back to 1, 2, and 3, that extent, as it has been sort of drawn out by Keith, is essentially based on surface and subsurface features, plus the geomag survey that has been ground tested and gives an indication of the archaeological potential in that particular area. And so instead of talking about a site, you can see that we have, in essence, areas with archaeological features within and in essence a landscape that has high archaeological potential. So that was essentially our way to work through towards an outcome. And if one would build or would want to build in the areas that have been indicated in Mr. Holswich's drawing, I still would recommend some archaeological investigation before a house gets in, just to make sure that we're really sort of on top of it. But I think I'm reasonably convinced that the work that we have done and the areas that we have earmarked that could be built over are reasonably free of archaeological features.
Thank you for that. Stefan or Hans, could you just, like, if we had a key on this plan, I think I understand that the red hatching is potential tracks or access ways, new ones, is that right?
Yes,
New tracks?
That's
correct.
That's what it is. That's
The blue hatching, they've all got, yeah, so tell us about those ellipses.
The blue areas are essentially the areas where we considered could be built on, where there is no concentration of archaeological features, which does not say that there is completely empty. I mean, you always can have a hangi somewhere still coming up, but there is not such a thing as a pit site with a number of rua or anything like that in it.
Yes, and I can see they've labelled the 4 areas that you've done your geomagnetic surveys, areas 01 through to 04. So that's the other thing in the red ellipses of potential dwelling sites.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, these little corners that reach into it, they were clearly coming out as pit sites in the geomag, and we did one of them. We actually did ground test only to the uppermost surface of the archaeological layer, but we could see there is an archaeological layer that sits about, I think, 300 or 400. I would have to look up the report, but sits there. There is an archaeological layer there, so that has been ground tested and confirmed as an archaeological feature, as the geophysical survey did show us.
So this is a ridge line we're looking at largely, and the PAR complex goes further north of Mr. Howland's land, isn't it?
Yes, and there are a number of 1 or 2 puka-like elevations between the PAR site and the area that we investigated, and it's quite clear that that last puka has archaeological surface features on it. So it's not just the PAR site, but there are further archaeological features that come along that ridge line, and that was the reason why we undertook that investigation.
Okay, so Poco means hill, is that right?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, don't apologise. It's just yes, it's good to use the terrain when you're describing those features. All right. Well, look, I'm pretty clear just on, and that map is very helpful just with the explanation. So probably we're at a stage now of asking any questions via the other commissioners for you, Mr. or Peter Bader.
Yeah.
Antoine.
Hey, thank you for that. Kia ora, Dr. Bader. And I really appreciate you taking us through the maps. That was my first couple of questions, was just understanding what you'd been commissioned to do. And so I appreciate you explaining that you were looking to identify, I suppose this is my words, archaeological constraints for building platforms, and identifying potential building envelopes which had potentially limited archaeological constraints on them, were sensitive to that archaeological landscape. So that I really appreciated that. I am interested in just in terms of the urupa, and this may be perhaps for Stefan, might be able to provide some information. The current information that's in front of me doesn't really give me much information about nature of the urupa, and I'm just assuming from the maps you've just showed us in those appendices, the urupa is quite a discrete area. And I'm looking for a nod or a and this may be a question that I'll need to ask the iwi perhaps.
Yeah,
Ngāti Mutunga will be appearing, I think, tomorrow, and Marlene will have some information about it. In the aerial photos, it is quite physically visible. You can see the earthworks around the original location of that triangle on the operative district plan. It's pretty close to where that triangle is.
And I'm assuming we're talking about an urupa in the traditional sense. It's not a formed cemetery with gravestones and headstones and those types of things. It's more of a discrete area with no visible sort of markers on the surface showing, yes, there's an urupa here. It's
my understanding of how Hanimo has explained that to me, that is correct, yes. But you'd have to ask who.
Yeah.
Or Marlene, sorry.
Yeah, because I suppose it's underlying the assumptions around the 50-metre buffer. Now, what's the extent of the urupa, and then that helps inform the buffer, and therefore where would the areas be appropriate for development envelope.
I can't quite 100% remember because it's a while ago, but I seem to remember that there is an ML plan pre-1900 or just around 1910 or something like this that gives that indication. And I think the cadastral boundary is based on that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is perhaps a question for Mr. McCurdy, just in his, and I'm not sure if he can hear us online. I did see his name there. Yep, he's still there. I've seen your assessment or review of the archaeological evidence. I just want to be just really clear. You've relied on Dr. Bader's evidence that he's provided?
I had visited the site as well.
Okay, that's good. That was my next question.
But I think Dr. Bader and mine's view on the site are pretty much in line based on the evidence on the ground.
So I just wondered if you just interpolate a little bit, Mr. McCurdy. I appreciate Dr. Bader's work wasn't to go out on behalf of the council or be an independent person from council to go out and determine what is the archaeological extent of these SASMs and archaeological sites. He was looking to identify what might be appropriate building envelopes. And I just wonder if you could talk me through how you've done that assessment, in terms of that work wasn't necessarily for these purposes, but I just want you to confirm whether you think it was appropriate for the assessment that you've done.
So that was a question for me, is that correct?
Yes, it was a question for you. Maybe I'll see if I can, now that I've asked the long-winded question, I'll see if I can simplify it. Is Dr. Bader's archaeological report an appropriate evidence to support or your findings in regards to the extent of the archaeological sites?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, okay. I found that his evidence was in line with what I had seen on the site when I visited.
Then you sound like your sound quality is very poor in this room anyway. Sound like Darth Vader.
I was going to say you sound like Robbie 2000, but that might be showing my age. My other question was about seeing the site in Appendix 1, but we've done that. So yeah, I just really appreciated you taking us through those appendices and understanding those a bit better. I suppose my last question, thank you, Mr. McCurdy, is for Stefan, and just in terms of the relief you're seeking. So we've received those appendices and the evidence. We've got the assessment. What can you just talk me through the relief that you're seeking?
Yes, we're looking to review the extent, the boundary extent of the site in terms of the archaeological evidence and the cultural evidence, and some kind of informed formula for how to blend those two together. I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but
That was
I
going
think
to be my
it's a
question. Have you got a
yeah.
suggested outline of what that might look like?
I've got some ideas, but I don't have, I think it's a process as much as it is a decision. And the other part to it in 11.19 in my report, I talk about a potential outcome where there is some protection on that ridge line, but it allows for one or some of those building platforms on the eastern side to be outside of the extent, but perhaps within 50 metres, so that the earthworks requirements of the plan would be triggered. Hence the need for Hans's archaeological investigations and consultation, but a permitted status for the building platforms to provide some support to the landowner in terms of objectives and policies that sort of say, yep, this can happen, provided it's well controlled. That scenario would play out, I think, satisfactorily if the extent could be agreed with all the parties. So that's where the work of Hans and Mr. Holswich on their plan could come into play in terms of trying to look at the site quite specifically. Beyond that, from what I've heard over the last 2 days, there's potentially some things in the objectives, policies and rules overall that I think could be applied for landowners whose sites are significantly affected by SASM sites, and perhaps something in the objectives and policies around providing support to those landowners to do perhaps a dwelling house, similar to what I submitted under the SNA provisions, where I submitted that a site that was significantly affected by an SNA should be allowed to build at least one dwelling, but be cognizant of the amount of SNA they were going to remove. So being sensitive to the fact that you are near a SASM site and not wanting to reduce or demean the mana of that site, but also acknowledging the landowner has some needs for basic housing or family needs or farming needs as well.
Okay.
This is a good time oh, have you got other questions, Stefan? Sorry, Stefan.
No, I didn't. But just perhaps an opportunity for Dr. Bada, if he had anything he'd heard, just Mr. McCurdy provide his summary of his assessment. If Dr. Bada had any other further comments.
I mean, the only thing that springs to mind just watching Te Oropuri while I'm waiting is, and I mean, Dan was there too, so we both have been working together with Professor Holloway on that site for years. So we initially started thinking that in the area where the motorway goes through, okay, we are off the Tihi, so we are out of the main area of the site. So shouldn't be much there. And the surface feature was a platform for a meeting house. So we got that one relatively quickly, and then it was a geophysical survey that indicated that the outskirts of the gunfighter path were still sitting there. And that essentially then gave us a clear indication that we had to excavate that whole area where the motorway was coming through, and I think this is sort of shows quite clearly sort of that separation that I've done before. Sort of on the one side you have the cultural landscape, which is separated from the archaeological landscape. In the archaeological landscape, you start with the surface feature, and then you look at the subsurface feature, and you ground test that. And I would have thought that both in the case that we're discussing, that I'm giving some sort of comment to here, as well as other sites that I've seen so far waiting for get on the roll. It's a similar sort of approach that could be taken to really provide that balance between where is the subsurface archaeology and where isn't subsurface archaeology, and all these sites are extensive, and all these sites are not just sites that start and end in a boundary, but these are more or less sort of feature clusters within the landscape.
Yes, that's your first point you made. Yeah, that was well made.
And we have to sort of deal with that, especially in areas where the pressure of a building or development is coming onto it. So maybe we just have to work in a way. In the ideal work, we can work more fine-grained and look at where are the main subsurface feature clusters and where aren't they? How does that relate to the manner of the site? And is there then still something there that we can utilize for future development?
Okay.
That would be sort of my final comment in a way.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chair, I didn't have any further questions at this stage.
Just hand over to David. You could focus on the policy and rules aspects, David, be good, as I'm sure you will.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yes, I was, but I think I can speed that up a little bit. But before I do, I've just got a question to Dr. Bader. Dr. Bader, I don't know if you can recall your report and the photograph that was on the front cover of the report.
Sorry.
Okay, I was just wondering whether you might be able to orientate me as to whether that was looking north along the ridgeline or.
We'll bring it up, David. So
yes.
Dr. Bader can give us some.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, okay. We are essentially standing on the northeastern edge of the geomag area 01, and we're looking over the ridge line, and the Urupa is in the background on the next ridge line, and the water tank is where the I think that was where one of these geomag areas just start on the corner. Now, where the water tank is today is only one of the positions. There's a whole platform which we could see it was water tank after water tank that has been shifted around.
Yes, so essentially that's a view looking southwest, is that?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. That's correct. And it is essentially taking into the view in of that, was it B1, was it, extent of area B1 curtilage and building on the Keith Holswich plan.
Yes, okay, no, that's really good. The other question I had was, in your report you referred to Trench 5, and I just couldn't locate that on the Appendix 3 plan.
Oh.
It may be that I've missed it, but
Trench 5 sounds to me like it's actually on the other areas.
Okay.
The geomag area 04.
Yes.
Because we didn't open that many trenches. We didn't really want to sort of make a mess of it.
Okay. Right. Just thank you for that. That was all from you. Coming to Mr. Kiss. Just focusing on your paragraph 1119, which is essentially the relief that you're looking for in a nutshell. It just strikes me that that relief is really, I guess the solution you're proposing is one of boundaries to either avoid rules or to allow rules only to apply to earthworks as opposed to the building platform. Is that in it in a nutshell?
Yep. Forgive me for being a surveyor, but I tend to think in terms of maps and boundary lines.
I know. I guess what I'm saying is that if the boundaries are right from your perspective, the rules will largely look after themselves. Is that what I'm taking from 1119?
That was my point of view at the time I wrote this report. I
Yes.
would say that having listened to the evidence today and yesterday, I also think there's room in the objectives and policies as well to look at situations where, as I said a couple of minutes ago, where the landowner is significantly affected.
Sure. Yes. No,
yeah.
I can understand why you would say that. Is it? I was really taken by both the Appendix 1 and Appendix 3 diagrams. I thought they were really useful. Would it be possible to illustrate the sort of relief that you're describing in 1119 on the drawing, the second drawing in Appendix 1, Appendix 1, sorry, which is the PDP extents map?
Yes.
Okay. That would be very useful, I think, to the panel, and I think to all submitters to understand precisely the relief in 1119.
Okay.
And that was all for me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, David. And Stefan, the reason I asked you about your expertise in the planning space was we've asked the expert planners who they are seeking on behalf of their clients changes to objectives, policies and rules to give us a markup and a steer. You haven't done that. And we don't have anything to go on in terms of what you might be supporting or not. Are you satisfied just to let that sort of obviously roll through with the other evidence that's in front of us from planners and Ms. Ritchie, or is there some specific matters that you really do want us to, well, firstly Ms. Ritchie to look at, and then us, because in terms of a time and motion study, we'll finish the hearing. It's supposed to be tomorrow, but it won't be now. It'll be 2 weeks after that for Ms. Ritchie to do a right or reply, and then we'll be into writing our decisions. So I suppose speak now or forever hold your peace on the question of the objectives and policies.
Well, specifically the evidence of Ngāti Mutunga and the cultural evidence is valuable and really important for the ultimate decision of the extent.
Yes.
And it hasn't been until recently that neither Steve nor myself have been able to see that evidence. And also, I guess I'm promoting in my submission for some kind of caucusing or evaluation process to overlap what is physical archaeological evidence and cultural evidence. And, I can come up with my idea of where I think an extent could be. But the real question is how to bring that together with all of the evidence, including the cultural evidence.
Yes, and I was really asking more about the objectives, policies and rules that you might want to see support change in extent, whether you had anything to offer. Have you seen some of the changes proposed? You would have seen the suggestions from Jo Ritchie in her 42A report. Is there anything on top of that that you want to bring to her attention and ours?
Yeah, I would specifically like to request a rule or a policy that specifically looks at a situation where the landowner is significantly affected by a SASM. And as I've mentioned a couple of times here today, I think that Mr. Houghton is not the only submitter who's here because of not so much the fact there is a SASM, but because of the extent of the SASM on their landholding. And the objectives, policies and rules don't change or adjust depending on how large the site is or how significant it is. They're the same. And so I think that it is a relevant matter for the processing plan to consider how large is the site or the land that is owned by the landowner and how much of that is covered by the SASM. If that is significantly covered, then that might have an influence on perhaps allowing a different consenting pathway than might apply if a past site was at the back of a 30-hectare farm, for example.
Yes, and you would have heard us on we, I think, talk about the reasonable use of land in Section 85 and all of those. We don't have any powers under that, but it's just where overlays and plans render activities for the use of land to an unreasonable extent. But here we have a rural piece of land that's being farmed. It's got overlays on it, and we're looking at an outcome where someone could reasonably use the land in terms of 1 or 2 dwellings where they might be sited given the overlays. So I think I understand the direction that you'd like Ms. Ritchie to look at, but you don't have any specific wording yourself to offer?
Not right here, right now.
And I'm also unsure about process timelines or getting together with the parties, which are, yourself, Mr. Houghton, Ngāti Butunga, and the council. Again, whether we have a time window to do that, and I have to hear back from Ms. Ritchie in her right reply about opportunities for that. In a resource consent process, if we're making a decision in that realm, certainly highly encourages for dialogue. We are on a timeline with making decisions, so we've got a limited window, is what I'm saying.
Mr. McMahon has asked me to provide an amended drawing to illustrate on this drawing here. Yes. With your permission, could I also submit with that some suggested wording for that situation I described earlier? Yes. For the objectives, policies and rules?
Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay. Okay.
What would be a realistic time frame to get that back to us, Mr. Kiss?
This week.
End of the week?
Yeah.
Yes, all right.
Okay.
We'll hear back from you via the hearing administrators with those 2 pieces of information. That will be very helpful.
Okay, I'll send that to Julie.
Julie, yes. Thank you. I think we've probably just worked through what we can today. Appreciate the time and the discussion, and just any final comments from you, Steve, or before we move on to the next submitter?
No, nothing really. I just say thank you to everybody for their input and questions. I thought it was all very useful and it's helped a bit.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, thank you, and we'll now move to Puki Tapu Hapu. Waiting patiently there for a while. Just whatever's comfortable for you, yes. You're right.
I don't know how you do this for days on end. Congratulate you.
Pity us.
All that, yeah.
Yeah. No, I have to say it's a. No, it may sound very I don't know, taxing, but it's this the content of the submissions and the issues are so interesting to us as people. And, yes. So yes. So just take us through what you'd like us to hear and introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I would like to say that I'm happy to hear that you are paying attention and that I can very clearly see that you are very across all of the detail in each and every one of the submissions. So that's an impressive feat, and I'm glad that this isn't a lost process, so to speak. So thank you for that. So my name is Fern Brand, and I am currently Secretary and Trustee of Tapu Hapu. Kaitiaki o Tapu Hapu Trust. So here to submit, well, to support the submission, and supported by Te Aotearoa Siramako. You'll be familiar with. So initially I came to speak to the 6-page document, submitting in support of the archaeologist report and Kirby, and of the Section 42 report writer. However, having sat and listened to a very small portion of the submitters this afternoon, instead I choose to go off script. So, of course, the written submission is still valid. However, I won't be spending time setting the scene or validating the existence of Puketapu Hapu in our landscape. We have decades of evidence and corridor and interaction engagement and outcomes, whether they be negative or positive, to establish our presence. And like any lack of awareness or understanding regarding who we are or where we are is perhaps indicative of a system that previously not only did not protect our sites, our identity or our status, but once instead actively orchestrated the disenfranchisement, and systemic degradation of us as people. Things have long since been changing, and this process is indicative of this ongoing improvement, and maybe see the progress continue. My understanding of the CESM triggers further scrutiny on any application on a piece of land. It causes careful consideration, proposed development, planning and implementation. Should it be proven appropriate, that it should proceed. Without it, there is no such consideration, and it is well documented what has been lost. In some cases, it hasn't been lost. I mean, indeed, I've heard and I do understand the plight of landowners who find themselves, say privileged, but I don't mean it sarcastically, of significant waiting time on their sites. And if it were an option, we would own or have management or gladly occupy those locations, perhaps not physically, but in spirit and in action. And indeed, we can complain also that it is far too onerous to have perpetrators prosecuted or brought to task. And we have many examples of those. That's where my little rant stops, but I've plenty of examples. I have plenty to say to some of those committers, perhaps if you'd like some response. Heard this afternoon. In certain areas, and also to the archaeologists and the process there to be had in order to find potentially useful or acceptable locations. Our experience in that area also has not been positive or productive for us, at least. So yeah, I'm going to open it up for questions, really. If you want to know anything, just let me know.
So, Finn, you've been here for much of the day.
1:32.
Okay.
So not really, no.
So you weren't here with Mr. Keat in terms of his submissions. Okay. Just wondering how best to handle this. So you've made a 6-page statement, and that stands. Just wondering, in terms of, perhaps we'll start with what you've heard today from the landowners that you have heard with Tapu who have an interest, and just give us your observations. There's some discussions we've certainly had with some of the submitters about some further dialogue and some further working together on extents, those sorts of things. So how would you suggest the plan might enable that, facilitate that, either on the short or the long term?
With regard to further engagement with landowners or project by project specific?
Well, I think we have submissions seeking, for example, Mr. Houghton just now. I don't think it's in your area, but wanting some dialogue about changes to the extent with some further discussions with archaeologists. We've got, I think, Mr. Rowe, you were here when you heard him talk about our site there. That is in Tapu territory, as I understand it. He's got 95% of that property covered in a Tapu and associated extent, and is looking to this process to provide some opportunities to sell his land, do something on the land. What would your response be in terms of the way the plan might deal with that?
Whereas, yeah, I guess it's the process is what it has been in the past, and that wasn't previously recognised for the size or significance that it was. It hasn't changed in its integrity. It has just been further identified and recognised for it. And so we could potentially argue that 60 to 75% of our parcel has been desecrated, rather than 95% of our private land ownership has been overlaid with a further protection on previously existing beaches. So, you know, there are, yeah, I mean, that particular site, primarily the location to the east, or west, I should say, is at 61F. We've been threatened, we've been brought to task, we've had Heritage New Zealand on our task, we've had lawyers and all sorts of things, because somebody likes to view and thinks they should have the right to build on one of our most significant parcels in Taranaki, or in Chatia. And I should say, I won't speak on that. But it's got 3 very distinct areas of occupation, including gunfighter, contact, post-contact, pre-contact. It's very significant and it's very large. And when you look at the scale of it, and you see the surrounding cultural landscape of what was there, you can't deny that it was a very healthy, very active hub of activity, and very successful one with many, many, many areas and incredible rich history. That it wasn't recognised as such does not mean it doesn't exist. Yes. Or that it doesn't need to be recognised further, now that we do recognise it through legislation and planning. Yeah.
Just wanted to check, are we hearing enough, who's got quite a quiet voice? Are you picking up on the audio, Antoine?
Yeah, loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, so it's an amazing system we have here. So
I can hear the seats creaking and pens clicking and
yeah, oh no, that's great. Yeah, so look, just in terms of just the discussion there was around with Ms. Ongley representing there was, what I heard was a plea to, there's a very significant site, that's not challenged. How can Puketapu and the council and that landowner work?
We've yet to be contacted by that landowner. We've not had any engagement at all to date from the landowner.
So you haven't heard from him directly? Okay.
I know there's been a series of potential buyers, both for 61F and E, for various reasons over a span of say 6 years. Not consistently, but and our messaging and our information provided has been consistent around the corridor and the facts of the reality of what they're looking at and what they're proposing to do there. That's ranged from a house to several commercial sections to a highway to you know, all sorts of things. And so I do recall in particular, I think it might have been the purchaser who had their contract extended for a few months. And I believe it was, we had a few conversations with them and they weren't happy with what they heard, and in their considered opinion, thought that because her husband was Maori and they had a good kaupapa, which was fostering children, which I do support, of course, that they should be able to do whatever they like there. Not the case. We wouldn't do that ourselves, you know, and it didn't seem to be palatable information for her. So for whatever reason, I mean, they didn't go into detail. We didn't get into design or any sort of site exploratory. Obviously, it wasn't yet their site around their actual proposals. They weren't happy with what they heard, and I do believe they went back to the council and tried to take action through whatever process or personnel they reached out to. But I mean, we've got a few conflicts of interest here. We've got I shouldn't be presenting on behalf of us on this. I'm not our cultural expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm still very much on a journey of discovery and learning about myself and my kōrero, but the person who should be here is an employee of MPC, and so wasn't able to represent his hapu in this particular kōrero, which is his, I guess, his mātauranga for us, very much so. And so I'm doing my best.
You're doing well.
So, you know, and I also know that he was put in a position where he was later attacked for his lack of action or perceived output, or I don't know what she was expecting, but his role in the particular, the liaison team, second to Amaha here, and it wasn't his action or non-action or his choice to stay out of that particular conversation, was it? His children, yeah, I feel sorry for him. It's not cool, but you know, it's not the first time either. You know, reaching out to a single individual doesn't mandate a contact or engagement. We've had to take extreme measures and go to lengths to describe and explain that time and again. We still have great enough petroleum coming into shop fronts, having a talk to somebody and walking away going, we have communicated and we have engaged on this date because we spoke to such and such. They were serving 3 customers at the time, but didn't make the submission. So, I mean, we find ourselves we find ourselves having to jump hoops and manipulate what we can do. And it causes a lot of disconnect and confusion. But then we also have others who make themselves available to give advice, and they aren't necessarily speaking on behalf of the mandated hapu. And so some people believe they have taken measures or steps they needed to engage, only to find out they haven't, or that advice might be contrary. And should have it something. But yeah, that was a little bit off track. But
we did. I think, as you're aware, we did have a 2-day site visit.
Yes, yes, and you would have met
involving Anaru and
yeah.
Poye and Sean. So Cheese were generally our guides, and we did see a lot of the Pukitapu, not a lot. We were taken to a number of the Pukitapu places, the Sesams, and we were sort of talked about the State 3 roading corridor and the fact that your hapus in them into quite a huge growth area. Very challenging from what we can see just from the site visit in relation to the district plan issues your hapu has to deal with. Just on a probably pretty relentless basis with the growth of the city heading out that way. And certainly that was evident from us. We could just see that. We could see where the current state highway had destroyed Wahitapu. Just with the geography and the lie of the land, that any major works in those areas is likely to come sort of near or it's the Wahitapu your planners have this terrible term of constraint. It's not a constraint, it's part of the landscape to be aware of when you're planning. That's the way I think about that. But yes, I see. Yes, so probably I'll ask the other commissioners to ask any particular questions, because it's been another interesting day, and we are very interested in the hapu's perspective. You're generally supportive of the plan direction in this chapter.
Yes, yes.
And the mapping and the extents and.
Yes, I believe, I think it's the last page of my submission. So we are supportive of the submission points and of Mr. McCurdy's recommendation and the section 2A report writer on all of the points. We also seek for recommendations on the last page. So we seek support for the Schedule 3 of the proposed district plan and ongoing mahi in the Wahitanga and archaeological sites review project. Very mindful that it is not finished. Completed process. Others are still midway or yet to start.
Yes. And Araha gave us a really good presentation at the start of the hearing yesterday, just about where the various hapu were up to in the full step process. So that was very, very helpful. So this is like all planning policy and planning, we're a place in time at the moment. Some work being done, plans recognising a number of sites. We're hearing the submissions in relation to those, but there's more work to come, which will probably come by other plan changes, or who knows what our new act might look like if and when it arrives. Yes. So Antoine, you're sitting there. We can see you in large frame.
Oh my goodness! My apologies.
So you may sort of hear every little wake here, but we've sort of been watching you larger than life.
Oh my goodness! I'm glad I didn't pick my nose or something equally embarrassing.
So it's probably a cue for you to perhaps ask any questions for Fern.
Yeah, sure. I had two questions, and tēnā koe, Fern, and just let me know if you were unable to answer them. The first one is I noted in your evidence that you'd participated in Ngā Kaitiaki Reference Working Group, and you were involved in the preparation of the submission to the proposed district plan. And my first question is, I just wanted to check with you what you understand was the process for identifying the sites and areas of significance to Māori with the council.
I know there was one in the series. There was also a working group underway, but they worked quite closely with Dan Curdy. Some of it was a desktop study, sorry, and some of it were site visits followed up with. And then that took place over a few years, I believe. And then we did a one in a series within our hapu as well, in order to both verify and collect kōrero surrounding those sites, but also any that had been unidentified. And whānau came as they can, so I guarantee, of course. And then I believe we went through it all once more with the archaeologist and the trustees as well. After that, I'm not too okay with the council policies around how we submitted it. I know once it did get sucked into the system, there were quite a few extents that were misarrayed. They were either not in the right GPS location, or again, they had very, very narrow extents and almost didn't even cover the physical or identified features in some places, let alone the unknown features that were reasonably associated with each site. So there was a process through which we corrected those extents on the viewer. And then, yeah, along at the same time we were doing we had a Kaitiaki Ropu forum for probably gone through 6 years, going through a review this particular proposed plan and feeding back into that. Yeah, so a lot of things happened alongside each other as they do.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because we don't really get to see the granular detail of that process. You've gone through the thinking, the sharing of information, the wānanga, the workshops, and the iterative process. And so I really appreciate you just describing that for us. My second question is certainly last week when we had historic heritage, which includes the rules for archaeological sites, and then for this hearing, which includes the schedule for archaeological sites and the sites of areas of significance, one of the key themes that's come up, and this wasn't unilateral, but it was a very strong theme, is there's general acceptance for the identification and the importance of these sites. However, the key matters that have been brought to us has been around the extent of some of these sites and having the accuracy that's related to either to the archaeological sites or the cultural evidence that underpins the extent. And so my question is around just understanding a little bit more how the extent of the sites and areas of significance was determined, or what you're really relying on to help determine that extent.
A lot of it was our historic corridor. Like, for instance, Te Orapiriri has been, at one point in its occupation, known to have 20,000 people living there. So we know it wasn't the crest of a hill, and that was it. It's all very ardent agricultural surrounding lands, which is no longer there. And we know that there were farmers and growers. We know that they're surrounded by other settlements, and we know how big they are. We have very documented and known histories around those areas. So for a star or a symbol of some kind to identify the be all and end all of that site from. And then to marry what we knew with histories, that we had imagery or recounts, tales, all those sorts of things that the archaeologists have. But then we also have the equivalent in kōrero. And so the discussion was had, and we played a bit of this, and it comes to a compromise, really, because of course we'd like the entire surround protected so that we could actually avoid negative impacts of development, even surrounding those places. But we need to be reasonable, we do understand that. And so the extents were settled on the actual sites themselves. It would be reasonable to believe that they would be even bigger.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a question, but it's a perhaps it's an observation that's partly influenced by my experience, but also what I'm seeing here in Taranaki, particularly New Plymouth, that the way we think about spatial extent is very much influenced by the time and place in which we operate. So, for instance, in these particular times, you know, you got very small residential lots, you know, maybe even down to as small as a couple 200, 250 square meters. Our concept of how big a space is very much influenced by the time we live in. And in traditional times, Maori moving between the hapu, moving between the coast and the maunga, up and down streams, these spaces, these places did have a very broad extent. They weren't very, very discrete activities. They were broad settlement patterns. I just wondered whether my assumption or observation is correct, or whether you wanted to add anything to that.
No, that's very accurate, absolutely. I'm just speaking on Heritage New Zealand and referencing some of the comments earlier, both with Orapiti and the recent Mutunga one. And I guess speaking to the road proposal as well, going through the Orapiti path, we opposed that in its entirety, really. And that was because we have been put in a situation several occasions where a research or an authority to do a research archaeological exploration resulted in destruction. And that was again through authority, through Heritage New Zealand. And their reasoning was that once we have opened those locations, noted what was there, recorded the site, it was in essence the act of doing that destroyed it because it was no longer being preserved, and being exposed as it was degrading. And so it was, in their opinion, a acceptable activity to then proceed with development. And so we do not want to be put in that position again, particularly speaking about significant locations such as Orapiti. And so we opposed the research activity around the 4 potential routes. And we opposed research trying to find the exact extents for the same reason. And I know the system's not there in order to do that, but the system is inherently a tool, and that tools are used. And that's what happens. So, yeah, we just for that reason we don't support research unless it's a location where it might be in proximity of, but it's not a noted location of interest. There could be a suspicion of something in the near region, but we have lost the knowledge of where that might be. And so, say if development was to proceed in the area, we would be on site monitoring, and we would be doing that alongside archaeologists. And there'd be a very clear way forward and process should there be anything found. And so we are active in that space as well. But when it comes to our past sites itself, we have been, like I say, built in and around. A lot of the buildable, well, I'll say buildable, I'll say greenfield, undeveloped land in the Bell Block through area is because it's a wahitapu or significant location. And now we find ourselves with developers with an appetite to do that, systematically cutting them up. So we have learned some really, really hard lessons in the last 8 years.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm just doing some writing there. That was all my questions. He mihi kawana kia koe e hene mo tō kōrero ko puta mai tēnei rā. Tēnā koe Fern, thank you very much for assisting me. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yes, just thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon or almost good evening, Ms. Brand. I won't keep you too late. It's been a very long day. I guess I was interested to see, just to understand how much through the hearing you'd sat through, and it seems that it wasn't the entirety of the day. During the course of the day, we've heard from about 8 individual landowners, and I guess the notes that I've taken is that most of them weren't challenging the identification of a specific archaeological site or a specific site of significance to Maori. Maybe they were challenged the exact location of it. In the case of one of the submitters concerned with a well, not too sure who, can't recall who that was.
Thank you.
Yes, it was, yes. But the point is that most were, and some were even satisfied with the some of the extents relating to archaeological matters. But where the real concern seems to have come in is around sites where either an extent hasn't been identified or it has, but there's the possibility of that extent being extended to take account of cultural values and to reflect that cultural lens. So that's a sort of a theme that I've picked up in terms of individual landowners' concerns. And I just mentioned that so that you're aware of what we've been hearing, and you may not have heard that directly yourself. Do you have any particular comment on that observation? If you don't, that's fine. I mean, it's just,
yeah.
I'm just sharing with you what I've heard and what notes I've taken.
Yeah. So I guess with regard to providing protections for our values, and I see it in Puketapu. We've issued a document called the Puketapu Cultural Values Statement, and this was done in order to somewhat inform developers and the professionals, the council, and the rohi or Puketapu, the sorts of things that we hold as priority, sorts of design things that we would be looking for, so that you know, it's open book sort of, you know, so you're aware that when you do an application and you haven't talked to us beforehand, the fact that you want to delete entire tributaries and cut into the start of a pass site for an extra 2 locations isn't going to fly with us. We're going to be upset about it, and probably, you know, ask for a redesign. And we've been there time and time again. And so it was an effort in order to try and give some indication around our viewpoint and our world view on the environment, how streams are treated, how swamps are treated, and how sites of significance should be treated, but also with consideration towards future communities. So having a cookie cutter subdivision that gets the most possible bang for buck rather than organic and healthy living communities with natural connectivity through to streetways and through to walkways and healthy environments through which to, you know, live, because they are future communities, they're not just a housing development, then that's the sort of things we look for. And so it's actually around that holistic, that whole healthy new communities. And whether or not that's because we need to, if we need to convince the developer that rather than infilling that swamp and putting another site there versus helping us restore that swamp and having a beautiful outview and community walkway feature in their new community, means they can sell it for another 50 grand per lot, then that's how we communicate with them, because that's how the language they speak. But you know, those sorts of things are the things that we hold as important. There are certain areas that we know sound like a crackpot to some people, but the Wairua is toxic. It's incredibly rough on the physical form. Like, you'll go there, you feel ill, and it's because of many reasons. I won't go into those, but and we've got developers wanting to cut those up into 100 developments.
Thank you for that answer. Do you think, though, that the function of the protection of these sites and the extents was really designed to deal with urban design matters and the cookie cutter approach, or wasn't it really designed to protect the resource in terms of the Section 6 matters, so that you have a site that's identified and you have an extent around it that reflects a buffer area to protect that resource? How does your response that you've just outlined fit into that function of the sites of significance concept?
Well, I guess that's where it's not restricted to Pāsa or Urupa. It's a site of significance. There might be a paru in a streamway, which are very rare and hard to find these days, because their condition is very much connected to the health of the stream.
Yes.
And so you change the wairua and the type of Maori of the water, and that paru disappears, and it
Yes.
has been there for generational. And so those sorts of things, it's an integrity of the culture, but also that cultural practice and its uses, as well as the stream health. I mean, there are other regional bodies whose task it is to resource manage our resources for all, but what has happened and what has been clearly documented in the last 30 years is the mismanagement of our resources and the degradation of all of our streams.
Yes.
And so for us, if we can, on a subdivision scale, protect what we hold dear for our future generations and for future communities, we'll do that.
The submitters that we've heard from this afternoon probably wouldn't categorise themselves as developers. The families who want to put on a dwelling or do some earthworks or that sort of thing, they're not the Rymans of this world or whatever. And what I've heard them say, and you acknowledged it earlier in your opening, is their plight is twofold: the cost of the process and the lack of certainty with the outcome. And the message that I was picking up from them was that, particularly the last matter, the lack of certainty of the outcome, the fearfulness of not getting an outcome has dissuaded not only them but potential buyers, in the case of Mr. Rowe, from actually either from selling the house or having a purchase completed. And can you give those submitters any certainty or any sort of about the process, so that necessarily it isn't a complete avoidance process, but that it's a process that looks at the effects on the resource being protected and the buffer area surrounding it? Or are you saying you can't give that sort of protection at all, or assurance?
Of course not. It's like you couldn't say that I'd be able to build in 5 years on a particular site, because you don't know the details, you don't know the specifics, exactly what's been proposed. And then I guess is what the citizens for is to trigger those conversations. If it is deemed that, I mean, 50,000 items out of a small area at the tip of this particular site.
Yes.
You know, there are.
I'm particularly talking about, and I wonder if you could constrain your answer to the extents rather than the sites themselves, because the extents are subject to a non-avoidance type consent, which is a discretionary activity. So any new dwellings or any earthworks don't go to a non-complying activity. They go to a discretionary, or even in the case of some utilities, a restricted discretionary. So that's not necessarily a preclusion or an avoidance type methodology, is it, that the plan's promoting?
No, not at all. It just means it needs to be done carefully.
Yes. And do you, yes, okay. Do you think that's accepted by iwi generally, that is the approach that the extents is promoting, that it's not an avoidance approach?
That's an incredibly wide question. I would never be able to answer on behalf of other iwi, let alone my own, not being mandated. But I think it's one of the, I guess I would say, only triggers we have that even makes people talk to us about it before they go ahead and do it.
Can you understand that that the fear or the uncertainty that uncertainty puts into the mind of people like the Keats and the Honeywells and the Rose, in terms of even engaging in that process?
Certainly. I certainly can.
Sorry?
I certainly can, yes.
Yes, okay.
Commissioner Page, could I add something here?
Of course.
Yeah. Kia ora, Commissioner McMahon, it's Sarah Muckle, just keeping firm company, but I'm just thinking there'll be no doubt that we have this kōrero.
David, can you see Sarah and hear her or not?
Oh, I'm in the room. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, distant view, Sarah. I didn't pick you up there under the mask.
Our screen of you is 1.5 inches wide and 1 inch high.
You're not coming in
and
as
you're
large
about
as Antoine.
probably half a centimetre in size to us.
Yes.
And you're a giant to us,
so my eyes are straining a little bit.
So I was just saying it's likely that we'll have this conversation as well, either tomorrow or whenever we get rescheduled to. But just in terms of your question around that certainty for those submitters that have submitted, or those landowners who, I guess, and like Commissioner Dash mentioned before, as it being a constraint, I think I've mentioned at previous hearings, I don't always view them as constraints, I view them as opportunities. And you know, if you compare an archaeological site with a SASM, you have to engage the expertise of an archaeologist. So why would you not expect that you have to engage the expertise of tangata whenua to help you determine what is an appropriate activity for use development or subdivision?
Yes, no, look, I understand that, and thank you for that clarification. My question was more around the concern that I outlined earlier, that most submitters seem to be concerned with the extents of the sites as opposed to the sites being shared with themselves, and that was creating some uncertainty, particularly where the extents were being sought to be enlarged. So I'm quite happy to have that conversation later on. I just wanted to understand from Ms. Brand what her interpretation of those rules were, whether she saw them as a prohibition or whether they were about a process that that the discretionary activity status might allow these under certain conditions, as opposed to a starting point of saying under no circumstances will these works be undertaken. But no further questions from me, Mr. Nash.
Yes. Finn, I've got two last questions for myself. Te rearing a pa, we heard about from Mr. Keats. Are you familiar with that area this morning? You went here, is that?
So
Like,
we have it's on Smart Road.
Do we have
a plan?
page number?
Yeah, I think
Archaeological?
we could, Mr. McCurdy, could we? 2633 is the site.
I'll probably go ahead and assume it's somebody put it.
Yes, it is. Okay. So it's not in your.
It is, it's got Puketapu's name on it.
It's got Puketapu's name on it as well.
Because we share a boundary and a lot of Whakapapa.
Yes, understand that. So 2633, whether we can hone in on that somehow.
It's on page 56 of Mr. Iku's report. Refers to the wider report. It's got its own separate report that you might have seen too.
Are you familiar with the site?
Not intimately, no.
Okay, no, that's fine.
But I would like to comment to the commentary there, and I guess it does apply to Orapiriri with regard to earthworks taking place historically.
Yes.
The entirety of Newcomen Airport is cut and fill from Urupā and Pa sites. And so yes, it was destroyed by, well, partly destroyed by earthworks. It was then used as fill. So anything that happens out there, we do monitor, because it is very likely that we'll find something that was distributed across the site through that action. So similar scenarios, because I know particularly on hill sites and whatnot, cut and fill is a method, and what was once there is probably still there, just it's been relocated, perhaps dismembered or dismantled in some way, but likely still to be found in other areas.
Okay. So Mr. Keats sort of stayed to listen. He's just behind us here, so there's no opportunity to have dialogue, but he's certainly interested in the archaeology and the hapu who are involved and around that. So I just wanted to recognise that and raise that. The last question I had was about the possible new walkways out towards the airport.
Yep.
And we heard from Mr. Nucky that he's concerned that, you know, that it was
Maori here.
yes.
There's a name.
Yes. Is that Urupā?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
tell us a
so-
bit about
Sure.
that and how the hapu are engaging on that or talking about that or where that's up to.
So there's a reason it hasn't happened before now. It's taken significantly long period of time to discuss route options, given the incredibly hot spot, I guess, that stretch from where it ends to where it's proposed to enter Waitara. And that includes in and around the airport, Puketapu Park itself, is where we're named. It's our ground zero. And the plethora of sites that's around that right through. So hence it's interesting shape that it's forming. But that particular par site and location is proposed, well, actually it's going to be secured by the council. Those two houses that are there have been inspected, and they are likely to be removed because they're not up to standard. But effectively, through a relationship with the council, we have negotiated access to that park and potentially co-management of the land surrounding the park. it also facilitates an opportunity to create a freestanding bridge slightly probably upstream from that location, from the power site itself, so it won't damage the power site or its environment in any way, and everything will be, of course, done very carefully. But what that does for us is mitigates increased foot traffic and impact on our urupa, active urupa, down Brown Road, which is where the I guess where the road continues, and there's a bridge there. That bridge is, its purpose is to carry silver. It has broken into our awa already, and it was fought. I think that's about the 4th iteration of that potential bridge that went through, and we fought it every single time. And again, through my personal journey, I've discovered that my knee was the one fighting it. Here in a kukui up to their knees with their skirts tucked up in the awa, trying to prevent that happening. When it did go through, it was supposed to be a freestanding bridge, and they put a leg in the centre of the awa. It has since caused untold damage with erosion on both sides and against the urupa, and it has also altered the course of the river with the shingle and how it gathers and shingle banks. So it's caused all sorts of issues, as well as sewer leaking into water. People now use it as a, well, it's a footbridge as well as the sewer concourse, but people also use it for vehicles, small cars, particularly if they want to avoid the main highways for lots of different reasons. And it's and very close and up from there. I mean, it's all Maori land holding, so very little of what is left in our here. And our urupa, which is a very significant urupa for us. It's very active. And when we hold tangihanga, my auntie was case in point. We had people pushing through the crowd with cycles and whatnot. And should that be opened up to the public, it would cause not only tension, but it will cause outright violence if people continue to do that, disrespecting the movements of the site. So there were lots of very significant reasons we don't want that bridge a focus point of the walkway. And so, negotiating with the council, we have identified another kick-off point. Through design, we will be projecting the power site. It won't be available for people to access for picnics, or there is a very tragic history to that power site, so it is not appropriate that they do that. And so, there are very good reasons why we're doing what we're doing, where they go, including further protections for Puketapu Park itself at the other end, and also educational opportunities along the walkway. So it has been very carefully done. There has been compromise, significant compromise, but also there have been gains with regard to protections that we've been able to secure.
So that's not a district plan process at the moment. It's a project.
One of our many.
And but the district plan will, have, in terms of approvals and planning, sites of SESMs, and that will, because these rules and extents have immediate effect. So it's the future policy planning is going to influence that longer term. Okay, I just wanted to just ask you about the hapu. You mentioned you're on the committee or
the trust board.
Trust board. Okay. Well, that's everything from me. Perhaps the last thing is a comment, but just about exactly the same time we finished yesterday, 10:06.
Apologies, I know you stayed for me.
No, we did, and we're happy to do that. And I think when you spoke last, we heard that you were involved in the airport design, and just
you've got a very good memory.
Would like to,
very good memory.
Was one of the most incredible things I've heard and seen. Boye and Mr. Wilkie talking about the just the design elements, and we were there. We were lucky enough to be there, because I asked for it because I'd arrived at this airport quite a few times and just had lots of questions about some of the stories and the artwork, and
So
for everyone in Taranaki, just the opportunity to hear what we've heard is just incredible, and I think it's like a bit of a tourist attraction. Should be. So.
Yeah, so that process was, it went from an approach. They had a tome of master planning and offer of a couple of po in the corner. That was where it started. So that had came a long way. Again, it was a very, very hard one back doing, but in the end, probably about halfway through, I think the value add that we brought to the table and the reasons for being there, we didn't have to keep validating ourselves at every hearing, and people started to buy in and actually see for themselves the value that we brought, and so we had support from there on. But it was definitely a learning journey, but for us it actually represented a presence back on the planet since 1960s when they bulldozed it. So very significant journey for us as a hubby, for me as a person, and it has paved the way. It has done a hell of a lot for relationships and the way we operate, and again, participating in forums like this, it's trying to avoid the ambulance at the bottom of the hill, which we have when we are standing in the stream going, don't put a digger through here. It's not okay. And if there are planning provisions in place to protect those sorts of features, that's the way to go about it. And also hearing from the relief that you're seeking, as we see her in terms of the planning rules and things, just opportunity to have these matters considered at the table when projects that might affect these resources. Well, I think, thank you again, and just acknowledge all that hard work with that beautiful building, which really is a credit to the district and the region. Right, look, I think we will close, but before we do, I'd like to have a talk about where to from here. With many of the parties who are still waiting to appear before us. We have, and Julie, I don't know whether you've thought through anything more about tomorrow, whether we interpose people that weren't heard today, or whether we go with the program tomorrow and then find some more time. I do know 2 o'clock start. We'll have a maximum of, I'm going to have to be away by about 5:30 because I'm driving down the country afterwards. So what's your suggestions, Julie?
So putting aside finding another day,
yes.
Mr. Holswich has graciously agreed to fit in with whatever.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah. So remaining from today, we had Mr. Holswich, Ngāti Te and Ngāti Tūparakino and Ngāti Tāwharikura.
Yes.
Part of that involves evidence to be heard with public excluded.
Yes.
And then it may be that you hold over the legal submissions and the planning evidence to another day as well. So that's probably about 3 hours worth, potentially.
Sarah, Maria, what's your feeling about that as a plan?
Yeah, so depending on when it was your availability.
Yes.
Julie had originally posed next week, Monday. I've got pre-hearing for.
And Monday's not
I'm sitting on another hearing with Kit, so that's not available.
Commissioner Coffin was available till 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I got that right. And then Sarah, you were available to 1 p.m. On Tuesday, have I got that round the right way?
So Tuesday I'm available all day. It was just
Oh,
Monday morning I've got pre.
Okay,
I'm unavailable on Tuesday morning. I need to talk to you about that other
okay,
meeting.
yeah, so otherwise next week's kind of disappeared,
Yes,
not available then, so you're then
Yes.
pushing into the following week, which
yes,
starts to get a little problematic as well,
with other hearings.
yes.
Just look at my,
So I did speak with Maya last night as well.
yes, how was my
Yeah,
evaluation?
they're okay. So they both
We are still recording.
yeah, that's fine. They actually were really unwell after the tummy as well. So
Okay.
pretty much
So the extra time's been,
would be really appreciate that for that as well.
okay. So that might work well for Mara as well if we do. I do have my sheet somewhere, not in my bag. So Julie, can I just have a look? My wife for the next 3 months.
Same.
Yeah.
Really, you might want to just check in with Ngāti Te Whiti, because when they were here before, I said that, you know, we were just getting through who was going to be the last one, and just make sure that they are available for tomorrow, that's all.
I don't think, well, tomorrow afternoon.
Is that what you were
Yes.
thinking, eh?
Yes, well, I think we just need to liaise quite closely, Araha and Julie and the team about what our program tomorrow is in those 3 hours that we have.
I can oh yeah, Glenn's still on. Glenn. Are you having dinner?
He's coming on.
I'm here. I had sent a message to the administrator that I'm happy to fit in tomorrow or whenever as required.
Okay.
So Glenn's representing Ngāti Taupō.
Yes.
And I can phone Julie when we close today to check
Okay.
if Ngāti Te Whiti are available tomorrow.
So let's spend the time just liaising. Araha, Julie and you, Sarah and Maria will just work it out. So we'll be here at 2 o'clock and then we'll just need to look at another day. I'm sure we can fit another day in somewhere. It might not be. I'm also aware that Joe's writing a report for the purposes zone, which is due, Joe? Tuesday. Okay, so I think we're just not gonna.
Won't be this week.
Won't be this week or next week.
I think it was on the.
Had a couple of.
Sunday afternoon's good by then.
I mean, honestly though, if I think, I know Maria, if we do have to do it on the weekend, I'm happy to.
I think let's get through tomorrow. In the meantime, we can spend some time tomorrow. I'm here in the morning. We can have a chat about other possible times and dates, but we'll certainly fill it in. And the other, myself and the other commissioners, we're got a few other things on as well, so we'll just work it out. So happy with that, guys. As a plan, we'll come tomorrow. We'll have read the material and we'll spend the time, as much time we can tomorrow, and then we'll go from there.
Do you think we can say that so Maria and Maya and I won't be tomorrow?
Yes, I think let's just go run with that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then maybe Keith, if you were maybe ready, maybe not, is that doable?
And then we've got quite an important process of report back from Joe after the hearing, so that's why I think we'll need a day to do that. Okay, thank you for that discussion and for hanging in there, everyone. It's as I said, these hearings are important, and I just not going to let the time be a master to us. We just have to spend the time that's needed within reason, of course. Yes. Antoine has been given the mantle for karakia at this hearing. So look, I'm going to ask you to have a prayer to finish, Antoine, if that's okay.
Happy to do that, unless we had one of the tangata whenua representatives who wanted to offer us a karakia to close. And that's the awkward silence I was looking for. Hoia no he mihi kawana kia koutou. E mihi kawana ki ngā pautiaki o ngā iwi o ngā hapu. Kua tai mai nei kia wainganui a tātou. Ki te whakaputa ngā kōru e pāna ki ngā wāhi tapu, ngā wāhi tupuna, o tira ngā wāhi taonga. E mihi kawana ki te tapu, i rao ngā o mahi. Nō reira he tukuna tēnei karake hei whakanoa, he whakawātia tēnei o tātou wāhanga. He auwaio, he auwaio, he aio no te waipuna ariki. He waipu, he waipuna, he waipu hina tānei te waiora. Whakaahu papatia te pū no tua ki te wai ukaipo no tuanaku. Whakarangitia te pū no tua ki te mana wai oro o te irata rito. Ka tauha, whakatauha kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki. Kia ora, everybody.
So well, everyone, we'll adjourn till 2 o'clock tomorrow.